fact that Londell McMillan, an African-American lawyer, was his lawyer, and his parents' lawyer, says depths about those who have all the right imagery, but somehow African-American lawyers and accountants and professional services don't qualify. It says much about Michael's sense of what was important to him. He made the judgment in London. I really think we ought to give Londell McMillan a big hand. Several lessons learned. He said we did not pay much attention to Michael's philanthropy and the like. Is that something within us? I'll take somebody like Dr. West to work with us on it. Is that what is it about us that makes us want to bury the living and resurrect the dead? He asked us to name 10 black heroes. We'll name 10 great dead people. Seems that nobody who's alive is worthy of adoration and respect. That says a lot about our psyche that needs healing. Another point is, what is the us in Michael? And what is the Michael in us? Michael didn't just happen unilaterally, vertically. He was caused horizontally over a process of time and years. I can't get much further from the #1 global musical family in the history of the world. I remember going to Mayor Dick Hatcher's inauguration back in '68, and that was just not so well-known family performing at Dick Hatcher's inauguration. The first African-American mayor, along with Carl Stokes, right after the Voting Rights Act. On one day, the mistake of my life was around 1970, preparing Expo. And Junius Griffin came up and said, Reverend, there's this group downstairs that want to perform. They're over at the Regal Theater. And I said, but before you go any further, we can. We have Nance Wilson, we have Quincy Jones, we have Cannonball Adams, we have Sammy Davis. We just don't have room for them. And so he said, well, at least come down and say that they want to see your afro picture. I came downstairs and now they were in the station wagon with the U-Haul attached to it, and the dad was the driver. You couldn't really say no to them then. That was a setup. And they performed, and of course, it was never quite the same again. So we worked with them at that stage. At the Victory Tour, we met with the family and had prayer with them because there was pressures on them to come apart at that time. We worked with Londell in Michael's financial struggles. No artist ever in the history of music amassed the catalog of Michael Jackson. And Michael ran his catalog. The pressure to take his catalog was immense. We worked through that process with Sony and the Japanese. We worked with him through the trial in Neverland, where they had put his name above a jail cell he was to stay in that night. He was in knots because they had planned to humiliate him to death in jail. So that's that side. But I want to say this. When I said, what is the us in Michael? Before we get to Hollywood, here are 9 children and 2 parents in a 4-room house on Jackson Street. 6 boys on double bunk beds with their mom and dad in the big bed in the bedroom, and 3 girls on the couch in the living room. 11 people in one house. And that house had to be disciplined and structure and order. Devout Jehovah's Witnesses, religion has a lot of focus in it. Joe Jackson, by day, was a crane operator. Went back and learned to be a welder Then by night, when other boys are playing in unstructured ways, so-called childhood development, they were in the house, in the living room doing choreography and learning chords and play guitars and drums in the house. That was their stage. There was no downtown stage development in Gary Neville. And so Michael did have a childhood that was organized and disciplined, much the way many of our great athletes are, from first grade to middle school to high school. No one is great because they're lucky. Michael's a result of a plan. And so the fact that he was indoors singing while those were outdoors playing basketball, they got what they wanted. If you call that development, basketball, got what he wanted, records and music. It was a home of discipline and planning. And that family left Gary intact. They left in a station wagon. None of them had ever been to jail, shot or got shot, or drugged. This was a family. And so, predating Michael, as we get Dorothy Dandridge and Belafonte and horn and bass and cue, they perform before white and black audiences too. But whites were not mature enough to appreciate the universality of their gifts. Michael converges neatly with the Voting Rights Act. As political walls come down, cultural bridges are built. Acutely aware of the politics of his time. You can have all that talent behind the wall, couldn't nobody see it or hear it. And that's what the MTV politics is about, because he had talent. We were qualified to use the bathroom before 1964, downtown. We were qualified to vote before 65, Touré. But when the walls came down, that which was obvious became apparent. And so Michael sees that moment, and the man and the time converge. And so these global audiences where whites by the tens of thousands in Europe and Asia found a comfort zone. We saw it in Michael before we saw it in Barack, in the sense that he laid the groundwork for global integration of culture that transcended. And so I want to thank you for allowing me to be a part of this session. I close on this, I think about Barry Gordy, because that family left there with the help of Gladys Knight, went to Barry Gordy. So what it is, he was at Sammy Davis's last event before he died. So from Barry Gordy to Sammy Davis to Jane Brown's funeral, I mean, Michael was always being, of course, are you black enough? All such foolishness as that. But here's the genius of turning nothing into something of Barry Gordy that finds its way into Michael's mind. Barry said he tried 29 businesses and failed. And tried to box, he failed. Somebody failed him. He worked on the center line, he couldn't take it. He tried to be a jazz record entrepreneur, and no one was interested in Coltrane with him, so that didn't work. And every time he'd come home and borrow another $1,000 from his parents who had a little store on the corner of Detroit, his family would say, "Here come Barry again, he's gonna trick your mama." "Here he come again." He says, "This is the last time he came home." And got $500, he lost that too. And then went to his sister Esther's house and knocked on the door early in the morning, maybe 5 o'clock. She came downstairs, she saw him, she knew it was Barry. Had on clothes, night clothes. And she simply opened the door and went back upstairs. And he sat down and began to write. He said, "Home for me is where when you go there, no matter where you came from, they can't say no." And he sat down and began to write on a piece of tissue paper, to be loved, oh, what it feels to be loved, and that became Jackie Wilson's big hit. So Michael comes out of that kind of creative cultural syndrome. So it's not just what is the us in Michael is as important as what is the Michael in us. Thank you very much.
And that we were brilliant. And that our black school is better than the white school across town because we have better teachers who really cared about us. I say all that to say it was a very special environment and a great place to grow up. But one thing that was going on during that time in the 60s and 70s was the growth of black music. And that was so important to us and our identity. And I'm going to go further than Torre did and go back to the little 45s that we had. I had a little turntable in my bedroom that played 45s. And you know, the first people that really came along during the Motown era were the Temptations and the Supremes. And so the Temptations and Supremes were really my idols, first of all, and I had every little 45 that they had made. But what they represented was really unattainable because, you know, they wore gowns and they went to Europe and they had big wigs. They were wonderful, but they were older, and so they were sort of idols and unattainable. But we loved their music, and it was very important to us. But then along came the Jackson 5, and they were kids just like we were kids. And they didn't have wigs and long gowns and tuxedos. They had fringe vests and jeans and, you know, beautiful colors, and they were just kids, and we could relate to them. And they were attainable. They were just like us. And as talented as they were, you know, you felt like you were a part of it. And I remember when they were on Ed Sullivan, I remember when they were on Soul Train, I remember when, you know, they started touring, and everyone wanted to be Michael Jackson. Everyone my age was in love with Jermaine Jackson, but they wanted to be Michael Jackson because he was the most talented. And you know, he was just this cute little boy who would come out and sing and make everything look so effortlessly. I mean, he just did it. And you know, Torre mentioned the Outliers before. In that book, they say if you put 10,000 hours of anything, you can be a perfectionist. And especially if you add it on to talent, you can be a phenomenon. And that's what Michael Jackson was. He never had a childhood, as someone said, but he put in hours and hours of practice. And he was already talented, so he just became the best entertainer ever. Well, I remember when their first album came out, I was working downtown at Belk Department Store. And it's right across from that Woolworths where you set in. And that's where I ate lunch when I was working at Belk Department Store. But I remember making my little Christmas bonus, and what I did was I went and bought the first Jackson 5 album. You know, I don't remember how much it cost, but that was such a big thing that they had this album out, that they were kids, and I think I bought my brother one. My brother I didn't like that much, but I brought him one for Christmas. But anyway, my next recollection is when the Jackson 5 came to the Greensboro Coliseum and to perform. And you know, I wanted to look just like them. So my mother, who was a seamstress, we went out and bought purple suede material, and we were down on our living room floor making a purple suede fringe vest. And my mother, who's now 86, told me the other day that she remembers how the razor blades cut her hands, because she was sitting there making the fringe with the razor blade so I could look like Michael Jackson. And I had the beads, and I put the beads on the fringe one by one. And I wanted to look like Michael just in case I happened to run into him in the corridor of the Greensboro Coliseum. You never know when you're at a concert. So it was very important to look just like him. But that was a great concert, and then I remember going from that to having the good fortune to be at the Victory concert when it came into DC. You know, I remember watching and taping Motown 25 and his moonwalk performance and playing it back to death. I mean, it was the first time, you know, having a tape recorder really made a difference, because we could play it over and over. It was such a magical moment when he came out with his brothers, and then he just went into this individual performance and showed us what, you know, hard work would do and what perfection would do, and how if you really worked hard and you were talented, you could be anything you wanted to do. So he inspired me as a young person, and he did create the soundtrack to my life. And you know, at first as the Jackson 5, and then secondly as Michael Jackson, the individual performer. But I had the good fortune to grow up and be affiliated with a company called BET, and I've been at BET about 24 years, and Michael had such a great impact on BET, and you could argue that without Michael, BET would never have become a successful business. Someone mentioned earlier, the videos that he created, and when BET was first created, we didn't have very much money, and music videos were cheap, free programming, and that's why we had so many music video shows in addition to the talk shows that we had. But when Michael came along and he made videos into films, and his record company spent, you know, $800,000, $1 million on creating a thriller video or a bad video, we were able to take those little pieces of film, put them together, and make, you know, highly professional, created shows. I mean, we didn't make the videos, the labels did, but they gave them to us for free, and it really turned this network into a business model that worked. And Michael led that charge. He was the one who really turned videos into full-fledged entertainment. And he did it better than anyone else. And you waited with bated breath for a new Michael Jackson video to come out. And the thing that he did, several people have mentioned MTV, and he really was important to MTV, but he was so important to BET also because he would never, ever give a video to MTV without giving it to BET at the same time. And when MTV wasn't playing black videos, BET was. And so for Michael to come along and to be as talented and accomplished as he was, he could have easily gone to MTV and forgot about BET. You know, and that would have been the death knell for us. But if he came out with a new video, he said, I'm going to premiere it at noon, or I'm going to premiere it at midnight, and MTV and BET gets the video at the same time. You know, I'm not going to give preference to either one of them. They're both going to get it. So he allowed us to stay in the game even when MTV opened its doors and started playing black videos. I mean, it's sort of like, you know, white universities when they started allowing black folks to play ball, then all of a sudden the black colleges couldn't keep the players anymore. Well, that would have happened to us if Michael had let it happen. And he did. So, you know, whenever we called him and asked him to do anything, he would try his best to do it. He was our first Walk of Fame award recipient. It wasn't televised, so you don't remember it, but it did happen. I was there. And he got our first Walk of Fame, and he came, and he would only perform one song. He said, I don't want to do a whole concert, but I'll perform one song. And he brought in kids, and he did a terrific song, and it really created that franchise for us. I remember when he came to the BET Awards and paid tribute to James Brown, and what a magical moment that was. And I remember once he came on stage and it was a surprise to everyone. I remember Puffy ran over to me and he said, you guys are kicking MTV's butt right now. Because everyone was so surprised that he was there, and it was such a he was such a James Brown fan, and it was so important for him to be there. And James Brown was so touched by it. And you know, they danced and had fun, and it was a great moment. And then I remember another occasion when, right before his trial, and his PR person called me and asked me to host a reception at my house in Washington because Michael Jackson was coming to town, and he wanted to meet the power brokers in Washington. And he was going to go up to the Hill, and he was going to meet with CBC, and it was sort of a PR campaign for him before his trial started. So I agreed to host a reception, and I had about 250 professionals, black professionals, mostly doctors and lawyers and politicians at my house. This was on the eve of his trial starting. So all the bad rumors and gossip had already started about him, but I remember folks came to my house that night, and I've never seen so many black professionals push each other out of the way to get to meet an artist. And they had all grown up on Michael Jackson, and they were so excited to be there and so excited to be in his presence. And he was good enough. He stood in a receiving line that night, and he shook everyone's hand. He got photos taken with everyone. He made comments about what people were wearing, what they looked like, you know, if he knew them, how their mother was. And he was just the most amazing guy. And that was the most time I got to spend with Michael, and we talked about business, and we talked about his family, and I was just so impressed about how different he was than what you heard about him, and what a sincere person he was, and how personable he was, and just how he loved people. He loved adults, he loved children, and he was delighted to be there. And then the final thing I want to talk about is his death. Because as Sean said, it's one of those times in life where you always remember where you were when you heard about it, when you heard that he had been taken to the hospital, when you heard that he may have been on his deathbed. And that was a Thursday afternoon. I happened to be out in LA because it was a Thursday before our BET award show. And so we were getting ready for our award show, and I was on my way to give a speech. And just before I walked in, I heard the news, and I had to go give this speech, and it wasn't clear whether he had died or not. And then I got word while I was giving the speech that he had actually died. And you know, it's still unbelievable. But the first thing I thought about was, you know, we have this award show coming up, and what are we going to do? And how are we going to turn it into a tribute for Michael? So as soon as I finished the speech, I had a conference call with my senior staff, and all of a sudden we just shifted into totally different gears. And it was Thursday, the show was Sunday, and we had to remake the whole show in a matter of 2.5 days. And it was really a labor of love for everyone at BET, and some of the staff didn't go home that night. They stayed at the office all day, all night, pulling tapes, pulling footage. You know, people say we had 3 days to remake the show. We really only had 1.5 days, because the next day was Friday, and then after that you couldn't pull footage, you couldn't ask for rights, everything was gone. So even though we had Saturday and Sunday, we really had to get it together within a day and a half. But when I saw the people at BET pull together and really make this happen and reach out to artists, and artists were willing to rehearse all day and all night because they were coming to perform one song, and because we turned it into a tribute, now they had to do another song, and everything was moving up until really the day of the show. But everyone, because it was a live show, and because it was a tribute to Michael, and because he was so important to BET, to the folks that worked there, to the artists who came and paid tribute to him, everyone put in the time necessary to make this show a real tribute to him. And not just a 5-minute tribute, not just the opening number, but a tribute that went throughout the show. And we had 10.7 million viewers that night, which is also a testament to how much he affected our world and our community. And it's still the largest show in cable this year. And you know, we said it was almost like he gave BET one last gift. He didn't die 3 days before the MTV Awards. And you know, we tried to really pay tribute in a way that would make him proud. And I think one of my proudest moments, not only because of the way people pulled together and made this show as great as it was, but I had word through Reverend Sharpton 2 days later that the family was really happy with the show, and that they appreciated what we had done, and they thought it was a fitting tribute to Michael. As I said, I'm honored to be here and to be able to talk about Michael and what he meant to all of us, but especially what he meant to BET and how we were able to grow and live through his music and finally to pay tribute to him, I think when it meant the most. So thank you.
The man with the African cufflinks.
Yes, no, I know we ran out of time, but I want to thank my dear brother Londell McMillan for his vision, not just in terms of his legal brilliance, but also his cultural leadership.
I'm sorry, I'm gonna let you finish, but I just want to
acknowledge
the Congresswoman Sheila Jackson.
I'm going to be very brief. I'm going to try to get right to the point in terms of trying to wrestle with Michael Joseph Jackson. He was first and foremost his mother's child and his daddy's kid. Catherine Esther on the one hand and Joseph Walter on the other. Why is that important? Because we can't talk about this genius unless we relate it to our own lives. And like Michael Jackson, you came out of your mama's womb, and like Michael Jackson, you're going to end up in a tomb. So the question is, what kind of life you going to live in light of the life that he lived? This is difficult to talk about because white mainstream media understands him as an isolated icon on a stage and screen. We have to begin with him as an embedded human being in family and tradition. That's why the first time I heard about the death of Michael, I was just getting off a plane from Turkey. The first thing that came to mind, of course, was Catherine, Joe, 3 precious sisters, 5 precious brothers. The funeral's always for the living, not the dead. How you gonna keep a tradition alive? When it comes to the music, we talked about Jackie Wilson, we talked about James Brown, we talked about a whole host of others. He was the crystallization of the greatest tradition in the modern world, which is that of black music. Is that of a people who can control solely over their voices and their stylizations of space and time with their bodies for over 244 years. That's why the anthem of the peoples that produced Michael Jackson has lift every voice, because voice became the major means by which critical intelligence and combative imagination and moral courage was manifest in a white supremacist civilization. So black music ain't no plaything now. It's a question of life and death and joy and sorrow. And in that Jackson family, you got wounds, you got scars, you got bruises. And the fundamental question for you and I is, how do we transfigure our wounds into wind behind each other's back? Or how do we transfigure our scars into what soul music is, which is the sharing of soothing sweetness against the backdrop of catastrophic circumstances, be it slavery, Jim Crow, or the hood today. That's why Luther Vandross means so much to me. That's why Marley, that's why I can't live without Gladys Knight. That's why Sarah Vaughan is divine for me. I'm speaking for myself right now. It ain't no place Michael Jackson, a true soul brother, because like him and like all of us, he's wrestling with wounds and scars, and how is he going to negotiate and navigate that? And then in the age of Obama, many of our young people are so addicted to success. Here you get the most successful black genius in popular culture, Michael Jackson, wrestling with spiritual malnutrition, emptiness of the soul. How do you deal with your soul in the face of all the commodities that you have? All your mansions, all your fans. Do they really love you when you're in trouble? Who was with him? It was just his mama with him every day when he went to that court. All the folks claiming they loved him so much, putting him down like he was a cop. That's right. He's a human being, but who's gonna love us? That's the question. He's loving us through his music. It's like R. Kelly, it's like Marvin Gaye, it's like Billie Holiday. Genius and problematic life. That's right. That's right. Trying to be truthful today. Not too much time. But how do you deal with spiritual malnutrition? That's the question. That's what I love about my sister Terry Williams. Talking about black pain. Michael was up and Michael was down. You up and you down. Just that his music can help you stay up. Whereas I don't want to downplay your musical talents, but I suspect most of your music could keep him up. The music of these young brothers could. Oh yeah. But something else, we all have gifts. He had a gift. He remained true to his calling despite his wounds, so that his genius could become wind at our back and soothing to us, even given his wrestling with that emptiness of the soul that goes with the American dream, in which you find some huge mansion in some vanilla suburbs and have people crazy about you. It's the shallowness of what fame can be. It's the hollowness of what celebrity status can be if you're not working it in a way that you're using it as a service to others. And as a Christian, I'll say the least of these.
The reverend, after he sets the room on fire, has got to go. You're gonna hold on? You're gonna hold on? You're gonna hold on? Hold on. I know you got your own security guard. I know you got your own security, but the Congresswoman wants to have something. Just 1 minute, please.
Well, first of all, let me thank Debra for putting her media resources to tell the story of the American iconic family, the Jackson family. Let me thank Londell McMillan for being here and being a comfort to that family. There's nothing more to be said about Dr. Cornel West. There's certainly nothing to be said more about the genius on CNN that always puts substance to truth to power, Roland Martin. He is from Houston, Texas, and I have to claim him, and for that reason I know his family wants him to maybe even travel to Houston, so I'm going to just say to you, my name is Sheila Jackson Lee. I represent the 18th Congressional District, and I want you to know that what I sensed on that day in the Staples Center was a homegoing service. And the family appreciated the love and affection that the broader community, the world, showed to their son. They want you to continue it. I cannot speak for them, but I know that they want this sense of who he was and is to be invested. Thank you for your critiquing and analyzing and spirit. So here are my simple words on the story of Michael Jackson and why I saw him in a different light. He came to my office in about 2004 or so in Washington. Didn't have to come. There was a whole series of issues going on, but he came giving. He came as a caretaker. He came as a humanitarian. Really came with no trappings, I will tell you that, but we poured out the House office building. People were running down hallways trying to shout and touch. Offices were unmanned and unwomaned because they had already left their seat. No, they weren't paying attention to whatever news was in the news, Dr. West. They left the halls of government to be able to find Michael Jackson. I had members who were saying, what's going on? But he came to talk about, at that time, as it still is, the piercing devastation of HIV/AIDS. He came to speak seriously. He came to speak out of his heart. And he was not talking to an empty room. 15 ambassadors from Africa sat and listened to Michael Jackson. And we were planning and preparing an effort to strike down the devastation of HIV/AIDS, which goes on. And why did they come? Because of the trust and confidence of the man who led We Are the World. His pedigree had already been spread. And so when we wrote the tribute to him that is filed, it was all about the truth, the humanitarian catalog of what he has done and what he did. And so as this effort, this dialogue continues, I mean, we were just amazed. We did it in 24 hours within his death to chronicle everywhere he'd gone, building burn units, which he did not have to do, rebuilding wings of hospitals, giving to the United Negro College Fund. Many of you wouldn't even note that he'd been a big giver to them. The We Are the World, where he and Smokey and Quincy got together. He used his musical genius to be able to be We Are the World. And I finish on this. We must carry the legacy. I legislate, agitate, and advocate. You are my boss. Those in Texas more so than you. And as the idea of honor comes, as we work through getting a robust health care bill out, and you'll be the underpinnings of that, telling the truth about the 18,000 that die every year because they have no insurance. Remember his songs. Beat it, but remember Man in the Mirror. And I always used to paraphrase it, Woman or Man in the Mirror. That's what Michael was about. He yearned to be a change maker and to care about people. He yearned to see the joy in the eyes of children who would come to Neverland. He enjoyed it. And so when I went to the Staples Center and we were dismissed, as we say in the church, there were people from around the world that were sort of gathering outside. They were either inside or they'd flown, but you know how you come out of a church and you're lingering. And folk came up and said, he changed my life. When I heard Man, I said, where are you from? I'm from London, England. I just flew in. He changed my life. I took that song. So what we take lightly, what we just take for granted, oh, the Jackson 5 out of Gary, Indiana, or the Jackson family, other folk are just pouring their heart out. One brother told me, and I call everybody a brother, he was in Ireland. He said for 2 weeks he traveled, and for 2 weeks he heard nothing more but Michael Jackson's music. This is around the time of his death, on the radio. Iconic storytelling. And there is tragedy in everyone's life. And I close on a note, but for the grace of God, there go I. My willingness to come because of the family was because but for the grace of God, and every human being warrants the dignity, the reward, the champion, the cause, the respect of this gentle man. The man or woman in the mirror, his story, I hope it will be your story, that we work together in this broad, wonderful coalition of thinkers and lovers of his music, this wonderful media giant, this beautiful woman, Debra, who has offered her media to tell our story, all of our stories, that we will define ourselves and our icons, and we'll teach our children respect so that they can too make a difference. The man or woman in the mirror. God bless all of you all. God bless you all. Thank you.
Thank you. Roland Martin.
As I was sitting here deciding what to say, I was listening to Brother Jackson and listening to Dr. West. Let me say in advance, if I step on somebody's toes, deal with it yourself. I'm used to it on TV, so I might do it now. There's a chapter in my book, Listen to the Spirit Within, called Thank God for Dad. And as I've watched the coverage, as I've listened to the conversations of a lot of different people, but especially black people, I have been incredibly offended and angry with the dismissive nature of Joe Jackson. And I say that because, as Reverend Jackson mentioned, when they drove up, Daddy was driving the U-Haul. When Reverend Alice Charlton talked about them traveling overnight from Gary, Indiana to the Apollo, driving that U-Haul with the family in tow, Daddy was at the wheel. And it amazes me when I listen to black folk denigrate Michael's daddy as if his daddy was not in his life. We cannot talk about giving millions to the UNCF unless you were in a position to make the millions. You cannot talk about what it meant to be the incredible talent if you do not even recognize the person who was there to ensure the talent was brought out. In the same book, they quoted on television of Michael talking about the relationship with his daddy. In the very same book, Michael also wrote, if it was not for my daddy's insistence, I would not be here. And so we cannot sit here and tell half of a story, tell a quarter of a story. You must tell the full story. There are people sitting in this room right now who had issues with their mama and their daddy, but they are still here. There are people who have gone through all kinds of stuff, but when you talk about the pain in your family, you also talk about the joy. You cannot think about Frankie Beverly Mays with joy and pain. And so at some point, we have to recognize that when you're watching the coverage, how many folks in this room have been adopted? Anybody adopted? Adopted folks should be angry when you see the coverage asking, well, who are the kids' real daddy? If Linda Johnson Rice walked in this room right now and talked about her daddy, John H. Johnson, folks would say, man, we loved her daddy, but she was adopted by John H. Johnson and Eunice. And so we see her as his real child. And so when we think about Michael Jackson and coverage, black folks should be up in arms with how they denigrate somebody and say, well who's the real, that's his children. He's their father. So whether or not you like it or not, I just don't recall anchors asking who is the real mama and father of any child Angelina Jolie and Brad Pitt can't right. There were people on television who were saying, well, you know, let's talk about the trial, let's talk about molestation. And I said, well, first of all, last I checked, there was a trial. Last I checked, he was acquitted. You might disagree, but the jury actually spoke. I also recall a question, the day of the funeral, when he died, I was actually in Jamaica on vacation, so I wasn't seeing much on television. It was amazing, although the people in Colombia, people in Italy, people in Germany found me, but folks I even worked for in this country could not find me. That's another story. But it was amazing on the day of his funeral, I was asked the question, well, you know, Roland, African Americans were, you know, they quoted a New York Times story. They talked about how black people had issues with Michael and the whole issue of whiteness. I said, whoa. I said, I've been to many a black party in the club. I said, and when his music come on, ain't nobody talking about his skin, talking about nothing. All is about the music. And the reality is, when you talk about the legacy of Michael Jackson, it boils down to the music.
That's right.
We can talk about trials, we can talk about hair, talk about commercials and all, but it boils down to the music because the music is that's what folks remember. Nobody's talking about Elvis Presley being overweight, shooting TVs, acting a fool, taking pills. They talk about him singing. That's just the real. Some folks still think Elvis is living right now. I keep saying Elvis is kicking it with Tupac right now somewhere. But as we talk about Michael Jackson, we must move forward and do focus on that legacy that folks remember because that's what it speaks to. It's the body of work that speaks to it. And when you talk about the person, we just need to be conscious of the fact that when we sit here and talk about somebody's mama or somebody's daddy and what their family went through, we have to ask ourselves, what have we also gone through in our own families? And but for the grace of God, we are still here and present to talk about it. So I say, Michael, thank God for your daddy and your mama. And for the children, that person said it, we miss our father, he's gone. And we should recognize that that was a son, that was a genius, but also the people who were in his life who brought out that genius. And as black folks, with 70% of our kids been raised, born out of wedlock, I think for me as a person who believes in authentic manhood, I will always appreciate a daddy because mine has been there 41 years and I will always celebrate that. And I will never disrespect a black man who raised his children and never left.
Thank you all very much. I want to acknowledge my colleagues, Congresswoman Yvette Clarke, Congresswoman Diane Watson. You all have been very gracious. Thank you all very much. God bless you. God bless America. God bless the deaf.